Hello and welcome to this next edition of the Value Exchange podcast. I'm Annabelle Lambert and I am here with my regular co-host, Rob Pye. Say hello, Rob Pye.
Hello, Andy. Hello, Annabelle.
Hello there.
We are delighted today to be joined by Mr. Andy Stern, who is in the US. We met Andy after doing some research into the Economic Security Project, which is a big basic income project in the States. Andy is the co-founder of the Workers' Benefit Fund, but also president and now president emeritus of the Service Employees International Union, one of the largest in the US. And we are delighted that he has agreed to come and speak with us. So Andy, please do tell us where it all started.
I guess for me, it all started with a basic sense of justice, about people who working hard, succeeding, and living in a country where inequity, even when I was a young child, just bothered me. Actually wrote something for my 13th bar mitzvah ceremony about injustice and inequity and hard work. And somehow that theme has sort of tracked me through my entire life from...
And that was personal experiences or family or that article. Where did that come from? Because it's just amazing how those moments of childhood always sort of come, they stay with us, don't they? They stay with us.
No, they should. I don't know. My parents were both very moral, kind people. My father was well known for, being friends with the gas station attendant and the mayor at the same time. He always had a lot of respect for everybody. And I grew up having an expectation that, no one was above us or beneath us, that we lived in a different kind of world, that he had fought in the World War II and, was looking to make sure, we had a world where his kids could grow up, but also behave, in a responsible fashion. So my mother was a very progressive person in college and had very strong moral values. So I think it all came from there because both my brothers have very similar trajectories, although a little bit different. So, I went from there. I went to college. I was very involved in sort of anti-war activity, but out of my first, real dose of sort of seeing the world from an economic reality of not my middle class background, but other people who I worked with, was becoming a welfare worker in the United States in Philadelphia, where my job was at the time to take people who had social needs or mental health needs who are receiving a sort of a general kind of a public assistance and transfer them to a program that had been created at the federal government for people who were aged and disabled. And so I got to see lots of people struggling in society, receiving minimal amount of work, who were being, pretty much, this was during Richard Nixon's presidency, who were being tortured by the government, as if somehow they were unworthy. People who, in many cases were African American, moved from the South, family had, come from a history of slavery, lived in a world of discrimination, and yet, because they didn't have the privilege that I did, the government was in a position to look under their beds for partners, or, believing that somehow we had to protect the government's resources against their drinking or gambling or drugs. So it was a really kind of eye-opening experience of kind of the oppressive nature of power, and how the welfare system in particular, was made to be, not about dignity or helping people get ahead, but really about keeping people in their place and making them feel unworthy, and fortunate that the government was going to do something very quite minimal for them. And from that experience and my experience in college, I got involved in the union, but more involved in the union in terms of how do we build alliance with poor people around their economic security, and how do we change the welfare system. And along the way, I bumped into this thing called a union, which I had no familial background or origin story, which clearly had some ability to impact the system, and more importantly, was something I, turned out to be passionate about empowering people that work, not just those on welfare, but people in lots of lower wage service jobs. Got involved in the union, spent 38 years trying to change the lives of the powerless and make them more powerful. And then when I left, began to look at, what was I going to do now about economic security. Had a posting at Columbia University and a fellowship. It ended up being to look at, where could the university, you know, put additional resources, particularly professors, to focus on areas of the future, which led me to the whole question about the future of work and the future of workers, which led to my book and eventually led to my belief in universal basic income as a primary opportunity for the future.
And that's a whistle stop few sentences through many decades of incredibly funny stories, which I know you've told us a few of previously. But um, you also in that period latterly wrote a book, Raising the Floor, that talks about the future of work, talks about the impact of technology. Um, I mean, where to start? Because there are so many. So um, when we talk about the future work, which I know is a central theme of your book, you you talk about technology a lot in it, a lot, which I love because I love technology. But technology was somewhat of an interest of yours. You took an interest in labour and social justice, as you've said, but you also are involved in being interested in the role of technology. Now, can you remember, where did it come from? Where did your interest in, have you always had an interest in technology, or is it because of your role in the labour movement, because of interest in economics, or where did the technology thread first emerge?
It probably first emerged with my own fascination, from living in a world, this is my age appropriateness, where there were Mimeo and fax machines, to coming and, you know, self-correcting typewriters were a big deal, to a world that emerged of, computers and networks and phones, and my life being, all controlled by a simple singular device that I carried with me everywhere I met all around the world. And it just was so fascinating to even watch in my own office or in amongst workers I represented, particularly in the white collar world of, secretaries, as we used to call them, just the transformation that occurred in a short period of time of how people's jobs changed when they weren't, quote, taking dictation or typing letters, but more sort of upskilling to being assistants and schedulers and, performing a series of other tasks. So it was just, and we watched in many of our public employee bargaining units, kind of the increase in white collar jobs related to technology and a massive decrease in jobs where everybody's, had a secretary or a typing pool or other kinds of jobs. So it was kind of a first person experience of sort of living with this amazing device that allowed me to do so many things and then trying to figure out kind of the macro implications of that. But then as technology kept increasing, it began to affect healthcare, where we had a lot of union members and other kinds of jobs. And so it just sort of permeated both first personally and then sort of in terms of my job as to like what were the impacts of all of this. And then, clearly as we went from personal devices to automated factories and the potential of driverless cars and all kinds of other massive disruptive forces. It became clear to me this is something that our country did not have a handle on.
And so I remember Annabelle and I met in the late 90s in EY, and we in the corner of a very big like factory of Dilbert desks where we worked. There was a typing pool, and you used to you used to take your work that you'd written and, you know, word process by sticking pieces of paper together and to the typing pool and get them to make a nice, and how things
I
have
think you'll
changed
find it was
since
called
then.
document production in those days.
We had
Um,
upscaled the name, but probably hadn't. We had added on Xeroxing to the responsibilities.
Exactly.
but your book, which was published a few years ago now, I think 7 or 8 years ago, was I think, really ahead of its time. If we play the timescale forward to today, to generative AI and technology companies in the valley, venture capitalists, and not just OpenAI, but looking at Microsoft and
Yes.
Google and Facebook, and this sort of, we talk about the industrial age from the printing press onward, and now we talk about the third industrial revolution and net zero, social justice, climate change. But you did a deep dive in the book, in having conversations with many really senior VC and technology leaders. I think was the Intel chap Andy. I don't know.
Yeah, Andy Grove
Andy
was
Groves,
probably
like
yeah.
amazing characters from the history books. Like, wow, and these people, you know, in 10 years ago, had deep insights in that role of technology. This was not just about the typing pool, was it? It was pretty much about every part of the business. And I just want to shine a light on what your thoughts were when you were writing the book on the sort of thoughts for business owners and labour, the labour force and the role of labour in businesses. Because I think this is really on the money, in terms of the shift that we're going through right now, economically, but employment wise. You talk a lot about gig economy and casual work and all of these things that when you wrote the book, people must have been thinking, no, that's, it's like, but these are now almost taken for granted, that we talk about the gig economy and we really know what that means. But
Right.
so what is the sort of your thinking, your analysis when you interviewed these great leaders about the sort of evolving role of the workforce?
So I'd say there were two fundamental thoughts. First, technology was going to be disruptive. Whether you argued in the end there'd be more jobs or different jobs, there was no question it was going to disrupt significantly existing jobs in terms of whether they existed or the skills that were needed to do them. And two, no one really gave a crap in Silicon Valley what happened to the workers. It was always, well, we'll retrain them. There'll be more jobs. No one should worry. Get a college degree, all of which we've now seen have failed as kind of alternatives. But the truth was, they were just salves that were being said by technologists to not have to stop and think, well, what would the implications of doing this be to a group of auto workers, or a group of healthcare workers, or people in a warehouse? It was more, don't worry, we'll retrain them, or there'll be other kinds of jobs that they can get. And so to me, it was just clear that making money and building new and faster and better and more efficient things that I really support. I'm not an anti-tech person, but the fact was there was absolutely no consideration for the workforce or workers other than some pablum that was being spouted by to make people feel better, I thought.
Yeah, we had this thing in the UK where we had this leader called Margaret Thatcher for a time, who made her name from destroying a lot of union collective bargaining and representation, in the legal system, etc. But this it seems as though this is almost happening naturally because of this workforce trend. You don't need to destroy collective bargaining power if you don't have a social contract with your workers, because they're all part-time and gig economy and all of those sort of new contractual. The role of the union, and you talk about how you sort of transitioned away from your, was it 33 years? 3 decades
Yeah,
plus
38.
of,
Yeah, yeah.
and you sort of had this. You were burnt out at one stage. I think you talk in the book about just being exhausted. Continually. So it took quite a toll on you. Do you want to sort of talk us through that sort of personal transition from that you went through in that period of representing workers?
So, one is I feel like I was totally committed to trying to make my life about changing other workers' lives. I think many unions are very involved in changing politicians' lives, changing their lives, paying attention to the politics within their own organization, and at times forget their moral and missionary duty is to the people they represent. So, I got up every day, and I used to do an orientation with new staff, and I would come in and say, what you need to understand about this union is that every day we represent janitors. And some janitor is going as we speak, into an office building and sticking their hand in a toilet and cleaning up. And at the end of the week, when they get their paycheck, they're taking a little bit of money out of that paycheck to give to us to change their lives. And if we don't understand that it's our responsibility to change their lives, not decide who gets invited to what meetings, who gets what office, who gets a promotion, but to change those people's lives who are depending on us and giving, very hard-earned money to us, we've lost our moral high ground, we've lost our moral compass. And so, you know, it was a lot. I felt a lot of responsibility. There were 2 million members of our union who every 2 weeks were paying money to the union, expecting us to do our best for them. They understood the world. We couldn't win all the time. There were markets and economies and tax issues, but they wanted the union to think about them every day. And I did. And we pushed each other in our leadership team. We pushed the local unions. We changed things constantly. We developed strategic plans. We tried to you know, restructure the union constantly to meet how the world was changing in all of our industries, and it was an exhausting, period of time. And along the way, sadly, I lost my 12-year-old daughter, which completely threw me, into a period of time of, not sure I could even do the work anymore. And so, by the time I was done and we had, grown the union by 1 million members, we had just succeeded in winning a healthcare program for our country. We had built relationships globally. We were the largest political action committee. We had more members than any organization in the United States involved as volunteers in politics. It was just really incredibly wonderful and incredibly hard work. And by the time I was thinking about what to do, I didn't really have a big idea of what to do next. And I was a white man in a union that, because of the growth, had been significantly in low-wage service industries, much more amongst women and people of color. And I didn't want to stay without a mission, right? That I really thought I was uniquely qualified to do. And I've said 12 years is enough for anybody to put their mark on an institution. It doesn't mean that I might not have done better than my successor, but you got to leave some time. So you might as well, in my case, I picked an age of 60 when I thought I'd been there 14 years. If by 60 I couldn't have done what I needed to do, then probably I should leave anyway. And having done a lot of what I had hoped to do, certainly made it the right time to leave. But it was clear the world of technology by then was beginning to emerge. We were still in the Apple and you know Android world developing fast, and we were bringing technology into factories. But you could see there was a lot more coming. We were on the front end of the wave, and there was a tsunami arriving.
And back to janitors and sticking their hands down toilets. Um, I'm not sure I got the story right, but there's a story about you and Barack Obama in the book, I seem to remember, where he wanted a union vote. And there was a story. I don't think you got him to stick a hand down a toilet, but to get with where the real workers were, and you got him to, before you supported, you got him to visit and arrange for him to get to the coalface. Do you want to share what you remember about that? Because that really stuck. It's the time since I
Well,
read the book, but I loved
yeah,
that story.
you can even watch the video because it's all online, but
Okay.
on YouTube. But we said to all the candidates who wanted our endorsement in 2008, and there were a lot. There was, John Edwards, Joe Biden, Barack Obama, Hillary Clinton, that they had to walk a day in our members' shoes. So it's called Walk a Day in My Shoes. And so people got to pick a job they wanted to do. And they went to work. They went to the person's home. They had breakfast with the person. They went to work with them and then had a meal when it was over. And so Barack Obama was a home care worker. Joe
Okay.
Biden was a school janitor. Hillary Clinton was a nurse. Um,
Wow.
there's videos of all of them. It was a pretty telling story because
Mm.
you could see who was comfortable,
Mm.
with people that were very different from them and who were less comfortable. And, Barack Obama, was just unbelievable, as was Joe Biden,
Well,
actually.
because that was where, I mean, he was a
Mm.
community organizer, so he was very,
Yes.
very
Yeah.
familiar, wasn't he? In
And
that.
he's very, he was in an African American poor family where he had done a lot of work. And Joe Biden was a school janitor, and he's a very working class, kind of person who grew up in, with a dad who was a pretty working class person. So they were very
So that
comfortable.
leaves Hillary then. Come on, there's a
Yeah, Hillary was a nurse, and I think it was a choice that sort of reflected a comfort with professional women. You know,
Yeah.
Bill, Bill Richardson. I can't. John Edwards was a nursing home worker. Uh, Bill Richardson, I can't quite remember what his job was. It was Chris Dodd, who was a child care worker. I mean, it was a pretty. When I look back, it was amazing. We got all these people to
yeah.
actually participate, which probably said something about a. They all kind of really enjoyed it. It was a very different day in their lives, from what their staff and fundraising people wanted them to do. And B, it helped us tremendously because Barack Obama actually invited, it was with a woman named Pauline. He actually invited her to the convention and she spoke at the convention. First time ever, like a home care worker got to express herself, and he invited her to the inauguration. It became an important day in his life, and an understanding that helped us work with him on issues related to home care workers. So, um, but it was just an unusual time when people who don't normally spend time with workers, don't just come and get the photo op and leave. You actually do the work. I mean, Barack Obama served the food, swept the floor, did the real work, as did others. So, it was a telling experience.
Yeah, and I know there are many companies who have an annual day of swap the jobs.
Mm-hmm.
We have this famous retail store. I think it's still alive, called Marks and Spencers, where people the management uh, go to spend the day on the women's underwear
Yeah.
store, something like that. Something
Yeah.
out of their comfort zone,
Great.
to be on the shop floor, as it were. So you've kind of got this great top down perspective, but you've also got the bottom up and this sense of um, agency of individuals, responsibility, mission. But you've also, and this is maybe not in the book, not sure how much you want to share, but stories of organizing in terms of getting attention, of sending emails to companies, or, sort of how you might lobby organizations for change.
Yeah. I mean,
Um,
we always believed in partnership. Just sometimes it was not easy to find a partner. So we became very creative in getting people's attention as opposed to writing a letter or filing a lawsuit where they were all very comfortable and had plenty of help. So,
Absolutely,
we
yes.
So, for the person that owned Boston Properties Real Estate and owned the Daily News for a while, Mortimer Zuckerman, we went out. He had a baseball game every year out on the Hamptons with the elite of the elite, and we went out with our team dressed in uniforms, with pictures of Mort, and I'm a janitor, please help me, or I'm a janitor, let me have a union, and sort of went out and sort of warmed up alongside of him, and he didn't quite know what to do. We did a very very embarrassing report on the private equity industry before anybody really knew who Blackstone or Carlyle or KKR was, and reported on Steve Schwarzman's toga party and David Bonderman's having the Rolling Stone for his daughter's uh, bat mitzvah, and other people spending money to flatten the hill so their polo ponies didn't trip, which garnered a lot of reaction, and,
Sure.
and and all of them explaining that we didn't really get it right, even though they really didn't say you got it wrong either. It was just we didn't quite understand, but it got us into a lot of very good conversations. And then in 2008, when we were having a big dispute with KKR, we sort of built a worldwide moment, and on the day of our convention sent I think it was 1 million emails and uh, tens of thousands of phone calls. I mean, to the point that their phone lines couldn't operate for a day or two. And they finally got the message that we really wanted to talk with them. If they hadn't read the letter, uh, and they called up and said, "What's this all about?" It was unavoidable. So, but the truth it was not done. Even though we love being juvenile delinquents, because I think that's what maybe drew some of us to the labor movement, was you got to act out and call it tactics or strategy. But it got us into conversations, and once we got into conversations, we were good partners. We were not, we understood markets, we understood competition. We are not trying to make people, put themselves at risk as a business. On the other hand, we thought they had a responsibility to share in the success with people that worked there, and didn't seem like such a big deal to share in the success. And if it was like janitors and you wanted to not be the one company paying more than everyone else, then we figured out an arrangement where we got more companies to the bargaining table. You agreed to join in, but you didn't have to be the first and pay the money before you saw that your competitors were going to be in the same position. So it just was unusual for people to sort of try to have a mature relationship with a business and a union. I mean, a business person to have it with a union, that was what HR did. That's what their labor and employment law attorneys did. But they couldn't quite figure out, like, why would they want to do any of that any more than they would want to talk about their supply chain, But
And if you contrast now with some of the activist movement, we seem to have turned a little bit more, I wouldn't say violent necessarily, but it's less fun. You've described that as juvenile. I just love the idea of dropping golf balls on executive, courses and sending 1 million emails with to make sure somebody reads it. That's I can relate to that as fun. Harmless fun. But we've had a lot of activists that are defaming art and chaining themselves in the middle of freeways and
well, I mean, I think what is the advantage we had is we had lots and lots of resources, lots and lots of people, lots and lots of political connections. And I think in this world, and this was what I fear in the Middle East, is that when people don't have a lot of options, they find the ones that are sometimes the most violent or the least acceptable, because no one wants to hear them and they don't have any other way to be heard. We did have another way to be heard, and it just makes you understand when people get overly frustrated and feel at risk. You do things that probably aren't as fun as what we did, but may be more necessary in your mind for your own survival than other people. So I unions have an incredible infrastructure of staff, money, and resources that very few nonprofits have available to them. You know, Too many of them spend it on politics, you know, with the Labor Party, or in our case, the Democratic Party, which is fine. I think it's a part of your job, but too many people think it's the core part of their job. And, I think there are lots of other ways, particularly directly engaging with the business community around, a sense of fairness and justice and sharing in success that people talk about, but somehow you need to hold them accountable.
So my big sort of, you know, thoughts on going forward with the fragmentation of work and, you know, displacement and wealth inequality issues. It is, um, in contrast to the sort of social contract of large labour forces. You know, who represents all of the Ubers and Lyfts and gig economy workers and unemployed people as well, who, you know, maybe they did work for Ford in Detroit, and, you know, or a coal mine, or, and we're now doing solar. And so where does the voice, where does the collective voice, what's the future of the union in you know, what could a brighter collective voice be towards organizations or work, social justice? And that, this is, I guess, where we get to universal basic income, which we haven't even touched on yet. So I think it's probably a time to sort of,
Yeah, so I mean, so I just say, first of all, the opposition, at least in your country, United Kingdom, and in the United States, towards unions by companies is so, you know, aggressive, that you're driving people to do, sort of system-wide structural social benefit changes, because a better system, which might sort of sectorally deal with issues of like, well, what do coal miners need versus what do accountants need? Because we've sort of cut off, unions, and because unions at times have not been as thoughtful as they've been, we've driven people to sort of mass political change. Minimum wage laws, you know, works councils. Well, works councils are not in that same category, but minimum wage laws, setting laws about hours and health and safety for all of society, right? Which is more of a shotgun, where we probably could use, a laser targeting, by focusing in on, well, this industry really needs more focus on training. This industry needs, something to make sure we can raise the bottom wages for lower wage workers without, making people uncompetitive. So I think the this, this the dissolving power of unions is sort of driving unions to use their resources more for bigger societal changes, which are good on one hand, but not as targeted as another. And business just needs to understand that's what they're sort of generating. I think the real issue is there's all the signs, and my book, as you said, was before AI, that there's a massive wave of change coming. People say, oh, driverless cars, it's never going to happen. It certainly didn't happen as fast, but the fourth city in the United States just authorized driverless taxis, for pay, not just with a test driver. The timing may be wrong, but you know, in the traditional areas we were scared of, like driverless vehicles, which is because it's such a big job in our country, or cashiers, you know, the time horizon's longer. In the meantime, AI has brought a whole new weaponry to the dislocation discussion. And so, anyone who doesn't think at some point, you can argue with me that I said it was 2022 and it may be 2032. It sort of doesn't matter. Some people are going to be hurt really badly. And the three things that we've tried, which are training, some kind of trade assistance, of giving people some transitional money, and going back to college, or get a college education, because somehow you won't be affected by technology with a college education, which AI is about to completely turn on its head, because you were probably more affected, by AI, since it's the first time we've, brought technology into thinking and information. So,
yeah,
all our
yeah.
solutions don't work, right? And then we have this, I would say, silly discussion about, are there going to be more jobs or aren't there going to be more jobs? And it's like the economist telling you there's going to be 4 rate hikes this year, or the economy is going to be in recession this year. Every economist in the United States said 2023 the U.S. economy would go into recession. It didn't go into recession. It actually grew significantly. So we don't know. Let's just admit no one knows unless someone has tarot cards that work. But until then, we need contingency planning, which was what every business does, or disaster planning. If it's a disaster, if there are tens of millions of people dislocated, what are we going to do? And if there are more jobs, how are we going to train the people, to realistically to get those jobs, right? And we have sort of neither that works right now. And so instead, we have a silly debate which works well in academia. Oh, I know there's going to be more jobs. There's always been more jobs. Everybody has said, the Luddites, have always said that, technology will destroy jobs. It never has, and then there's people who say this time is different. And I wish I knew. I'm a dystopian. I'm a dystopian because the people I woke up every day to fight for will pay a price if the academics and intellectuals and leaders of our countries are wrong. They'll be fine, but some janitor who has a cleaning machine or radiology technologist who is replaced by AI, doesn't have an opportunity, to continue working with the same kind of opportunities, or their children won't. And so, this is, a debate where some people massively suffer by mistakes, and other people can exist with or without being right or wrong in terms of the prognostication. So, to me, let's just assume the worst. Let's hope for the best. But isn't having something like a universal basic income, a floor, a bridge, an opportunity to be an entrepreneur, a way to live your life more fully and satisfying if you choose to not have work be the way that you get meaning? Isn't that a better option to try to play out than debate whether or not it's going to happen? And so to me, I happen to think we need it, but I also, who would have known we would have needed to shoot down drones over Israel being launched by Iran 10 years ago? But someone created the Iron Dome and created technology and never knew if they would have to shoot down 3,000 or 300 drones, and they did. No one knows whether someday we're going to wake up and driverless trucks are going to transition in 3 years, and the largest job in 27 states in the United States is going to be vastly reduced and have tremendous dislocation as it did to industrial workers in our country. And so, to me, universal basic income is the only thing I found that guarantees some level of economic security for people and doesn't rely on what I so far have been failures in training or short-term government interventions.
Yeah, and what we've found the last 15 years, our experience of it's not just the people who are going to be hurt most who are transitioning from one stable labour to another. It's the people who are outside that labour market, where the traditional wisdom of economics is upskill, reskill, train,
Right.
another qualification, because they can then get into these jobs that are not going to exist. Which again seems like silly logic. Whereas actually, if you give them, and the Commons Fund is a 2-year, limited
Right.
intervention to transition, but it's not to go on a training course or to do something that we think
Right.
is the answer. It's actually to give them some self-esteem, agency, and belief and trust that they could find some answers that because maybe they're going to transition to something that doesn't exist today. And I think
Right.
Yeah.
that's the exciting thing when we talk about the future work. None of us know what the future work is, so it's no good speaking to professors and academics and going, tell us what the future's like, because what we actually need is the agility to be more resilient of our change to this or that. So you're taking the janitor and actually believing in them, whether they have a job or not. And I think that's the sort of important thing. And we know that universal basic income is a bit of a political hot potato. It's quite difficult to vote in. Certainly, you can't seem to get Congress to do anything with the House at the moment in perfect harmony. In fact, it happened in the UK or other coalition governments where you kind of do get this governing dystopia where they can't agree to tie their shoelaces. So it's quite difficult to do the top down stuff, but it's not difficult to do the bottom up stuff. And it's like, if you compare even on a per capita basis, what's happening in basic income projects in America versus the UK, maybe some other parts of it, I think there are 1,000 non-profits in the US doing community level basic income experiments. I think we have one in the UK. We've got about 4 or 5 full-time equivalents in the whole United Kingdom, and even on a per capita basis, it's not really registering as a grassroots
Yeah, I
intervention.
mean,
There's one big project. Yeah,
yeah, and
sorry.
I would say, well, one thing we have proven, I would argue, is that cash is an effective
Yes,
social service project, whether it's
yes,
universal basic income, but
yes.
clearly between the COVID relief and all these experiments that are going on, where, as you said, we're giving people money and letting them figure out if you're a foster child leaving your foster family, you're incarcerated coming out of jail, you're an artist. We're giving people choices, and it's clear it is so much better than a regulatory environment overseen by, people trying to hold you accountable. So I think that has been, a fabulous opportunity. And, whether it expands someday to 2 years of cash if you're laid off from a job because of displacement, who knows? But at least we have a foundation that we're not arguing that people are going to spend it all on drugs, women, gambling, men, whatever it might be. So that's been very helpful, I'd say, in our country. I think there's always clearly a question about, guaranteed income versus guaranteed universal basic income. These
Floor,
are
a cash
Yeah, exactly.
transfer,
But
all
these are
these.
all
Yeah,
the right questions, right?
Mm.
To,
yeah.
to try to figure out. But but what we've learned is that a lot of times, and this is a famous quote by Rahm Emanuel, now our ambassador to Japan. But it's like never let a good crisis go to waste. And the truth is, if you have something on the shelf, if you've developed an idea, which has been developed like cash, you know, when the moment comes that people need something to be done, people reach for something that's proven as opposed to speculative. And so to me, we got to keep working and pressing ahead, with common fund ideas or other ideas, so that when we get to this point that people are looking around and saying, what we've tried, this training and upskilling and reskilling, and now we have all these people in the informal economy or in the gig economy, this is not going to work. We have an answer, right? And I think that's what our goal should be, not fighting about what is the answer, but trying to get a series of answers and beginning to test and learn, as to not only which one works, but what does it take to make it work, right? What are the supports that people need? Some people don't have bank accounts. They don't have, homeless people don't have cell phones. You give them money and you can't even find them to, figure out how they're doing or what else they might need or social service support. So to me, we're in that stage of, let's not, in my mind, debate will it or won't it, but let's say what's going to be on the shelf when the moment comes that's going to work, and stop, either fix the training proposition because it didn't work for the industrial workers, and there are plenty of jobs in the US. And I don't know if this is the right analogy, but you know, you can't make a goalie into a striker or a striker into a goalie. Like, because people are people doesn't mean they can do, I worked in an industrial factory on a plant. I'm going to be able to install sheet metal solar panels. I might have physical differences. I may be older. I may not have the intellectual capacity. I may be overly intellectually capable to do that. It's just, it's trite answers of people been giving for 25 years, but they can't point to where are the jobs. There's been a massive relocation where the government's programs, as opposed to what you said, individuals on their own have found a transition. Individuals tend to find their transitions. Government has done a miserable job. finding
Yeah,
some, yeah,
and I think that's a point not only well made but backed up by so much evidence where we turn out every year a new intellectual argument of how a greater power might have a transition path for, you know, a sheet metal worker transitioning to, because they need now this qualification, and if they then go and sit this, then everything will be fine. And it's not only a wrong hypothesis, it's also
It's
very
depressing.
damaging because
Yeah.
you make a promise to all of those people that if you then go on this construction course, which is a reskilling course,
right.
then a forever wonderful job is going to, that you're going to love, is going to come at the other end of it. And it's like, well, who says, number one, the job will be there, and number two, I'll love it, number three, I'll be any good at it, you know? And so it's a point, I think, very, very well made, Andy. Yeah.
Mm.
And that's why, but it's your real point that both of you, that, people know, people are smart. They know what their opportunities are. They know what's in their community. They have friends that work in different jobs. Yeah, they're going to need some help and some guidance at times. But, to start off with, I know the answer and I'm going to tell you what it is, as opposed to what do you think? And let me tell you what you have to think about if you're going to go do that, is just a different power relationship and a different, I'd say, ability to be effective. Because, what is some, like me, white middle class person in a welfare office at the age of 21 or 22 doing, telling, people who are 30, 40, 50, living in the middle of a discriminatory employment system, with very little skills. And I'm going to tell them what, go to college, go to community college, look on the back of a matchbook and take a truck driver course. Be a beautician is what everybody ended up sending people to do, which was
Yeah.
silly because it was racist and silly, because they were
Yeah,
in
we have
Texas. Yeah,
hairdressers
Hairdressers.
over
Yeah.
exactly.
here, and
Yeah,
that was the
hairdressers,
one.
right.
You know,
And
it's like,
and
yeah,
that's what we're going to look at and say, the government has really done a great job finding, people free of discrimination, consistent with people's passion. No, people can't just pick up and leave and go to Texas because there's a lot more jobs in Texas when they live in Pennsylvania. They have families and churches and communities and Boy Scouts and Girl Scouts and soccer leagues and things that take a lot of consideration to disrupt, as opposed to, well, there's 1,000 more jobs in Texas and 1,000 less jobs in Pennsylvania. What's the problem? You know, it's just it's a real elitist,
Yeah.
um, lack of understanding of how the life works for people, particularly who don't have a lot of resources.
wow.
Yeah.
I'm just loving. I'm loving every minute. And Annabelle, do you have some
No,
questions
I
for
mean,
Andy?
I'm just like, I am loving every minute too. I feel, a lot of similarities. I grew up as a Thatcher's child, and I left. Well, I did what you're supposed to do. I went to
Mm.
university. I was the first generation in my family to go to university, and I got a degree. I didn't work very hard doing it, but I got it. And then I came out of university in a recession, and I got a job, and on I went. And I've just gone through, since then, life just on a journey really of understanding. And I now look back at what happened in the 80s when I was growing up, and that motivation that I had to go out and work in the economy and be a capitalist and earn loads of money. And I on many occasions have looked back at sort of particularly the coal mining situation in this country, and often talk about when they're talking about shutting down, factories, or shutting down mines, or just decimating community effectively, like you describe. In many ways, closing the coal mines in the 80s was a great environmental thing to do in the country. Great, let's close the coal mines, but nobody was doing it for those reasons in the 80s. And I just look at you cannot and should not be ripping the heart out of community like that without having in place a plan to support the people, the community, whatever, not doing to them, but understanding what you're doing to these people and what's happening. And I think what's ahead with what you described, Andy, as to we don't know the answers, and I feel so motivated at the moment, but with what the possibilities for just helping people experiment, understand that people have the answers, that communities have the answers, and they don't need to be done to, they need the space and the freedom to do, is just such a worthwhile activity to be enabling, and but also not, it may work, it may not, but I feel very motivated that people are very resilient generally. And they know how to, if you can give them that support and that foundation, which is why I'm sort of, I too came to basic income and thought, this is, surely that's a human right. A guy would, sees it as an ethical, it's the right thing to do, to enable people to just live at the basest of levels. Why aren't we doing that? Why wouldn't we do that? So I'm just very motivated by everything that you've said, Andy. So thank you for sharing.
Well, no, it'd just be great. I'm very, very impressed at what the Economic Security Project and others have done here and mayors in particular in our country have sort of got the fever of it. And, now there's so many that have done it that it's not like a radical thing to do. And nothing's been a disaster, in the sense of, you know, like our other programs in Medicaid where doctors steal money and do other things. Poor people have tended not to really, they don't have enough that they're given anyway. And even the ones that have it have showed very few signs of gambling or drugs or all the worst fears that people have. But, we are at a period both of experimentation, but way past that on technology. We're experimenting, but you can see the trend line. You can't yet see the trend line on what we're going to do if this has dramatic workforce implications. In our country, you can see some of these ideas about cash, being quick, giving people choices. We don't have a funding plan yet of how would you sustain it as a national policy like you do with the NHS or any other child care or national social benefit policy, which we really need to work on. But at least there's some foundation being laid, but not fast enough compared to, I think, the wave that's building, on the technology AI side.
So, just last question from me. Two questions, maybe in one. Do you have views now or in the past in terms of the global situation on cash transfer and economic security inequality? And then just open question in terms of somebody wants to get involved. What advice would you give people who want to listen to this podcast and they go, right, what, okay, I want to help, what do I do? What advice? So they're two in one really.
Yeah.
For my last question.
Yeah, I would say, we have seen similar results, but obviously in very different contexts in places like Kenya, which is where the largest experiment's been going on with Give Directly for the longest period of time. A lot of small business incubation, a lot of pooling of resources so that, it's almost like a investment fund where, we pool our resources and you start a business now and then you pay it back and I start it next year. So we've seen just a lot of good community level cooperation and incubation of new businesses in places where, you know, a top-down approach has failed people in terms of giving them certain services. And I don't think you've seen much differently. I mean, if you look at the sovereign wealth funds,
Yes.
Around the world, I mean, you wouldn't call it basic income, but if you live in Qatar or you live in Sweden, the money, from oil, or is it Denmark? I'm not sure which one.
Norway.
Norway.
Norway. I'm sorry, Norway. Thank you. I got my standard. But if you live in Norway, you sort of have your own form of basic income, right? We're taking shared resources, pooling them, and then providing a higher level of services, or in Qatar, or other countries, Saudi Arabia. So, we don't call them basic income experiments, but they really are the government pooling resources and distributing so that everybody has a basic set of either social benefits or income or both. in some cases. So I think the news is good from rich countries like Norway and Qatar to poor countries like Kenya. That cash does work, and how you structure it, whether as a country to provide the benefits or giving people cash in their communities, we can argue about that. But as long as there's a floor, I'm pretty happy, even though I think giving people money directly is better than the government trying to figure out how to do it. But if everybody has health care, a basic income, childcare, education, it's come through the government, I can more than live with that. So that's one thing. Two is, I think, you know, one of your unions in the UK, Unison, has a little basic income caucus or coalition. So I think wherever you are, there's a lot of information on the web and stuff, and there's a lot of ways. And like the people in the US, as you've learned, are more than happy to talk to anyone. So to get your local counselor, to get your local mayor, to get your local MP, to just get on a phone call, with a mayor in the United States, or, a advocate in the United States, or another nonprofit, and just start by, you know, making contact and thinking, right? And let people help you. You don't have to figure it out. But, I think in almost every community, there are people, whether they're in church related nonprofits or they're in government, who do try to figure out how do we help the citizens of our community. And, waiting for London to send us money, may not be the only, solution we have here. And so,
It's no
I
answer,
think,
that one.
yeah, exactly. I would just say that this is a place, because of technology and because the advocates are so interested in helping generate more activity and more learning. It's not a kind of place where you try to call your MP and you get the third assistant and they send you a fancy note back, in a form letter. People really want to help here, and I'd say to anybody listening, between the people on this phone or anywhere else, you can find people who can connect you to people that are trying to do things, and then figure out what makes sense in your community.
And,
Because
and,
just
that,
like
and
basic income, every community is different.
that's the wisest words you could imagine, because so many people who are outside, on the outside, have been kicked and trodden on so much that they just don't have the confidence that anybody's going to speak to them or be interested, or there's any information that will help, because there's this sort of I forget the language you used early on in the interview, where you talked about these sort of government systems that were almost harming people, and not helping them, but actually almost seemingly going out of their way to do harm to people, right? And of
Right.
course that couldn't be the intention when it's set up, but ever, let's go and hurt some people. But if you're on the receiving end of that, your self-esteem and confidence and ability to believe in basic human nature can be so quickly evaporated. So anybody's listening to this, listen to Andy and just call up somebody and have a conversation about this, because there's so much activity. 1,000 organizations in the US, organizations, not individuals, who are supporting projects at a community level that are experimenting with this stuff. So you might not get Biden or any other president, doing it unilaterally, at the next election on a campaign, but you certainly find a lot of mayors and communities and projects and people all over the world, and especially in America.
Well said.
So that
Okay.
was
Yeah.
probably the quickest hour that
Yeah.
I've spent this in the last couple of weeks. I loved that interview. It was absolutely packed with insights and wisdom. So, Andy, thank you very much for your
Yeah.
time.
Thank you both very
Thank
much.
you, Andy.